culture has been paused. It's full of nothing but
Pause.
instead of our society encouraging traditional family relationships, all of the mainstream media and entertainment industry have enshrined nothing but sexual degeneracy, whether it's through celebrities twerking and strip teasing half nude, sometimes even with sex toys, whether that be the cuckold images and cuckold themes we see, where the most obvious tend to be the interracial cuckoldry, whether it is art of a man opening his butt cheeks, like in the art exhibition we saw in the UK, which shows why so many people are no longer visiting the museums. But however, we see this attack on Western values, Western people, and on the family. Many intellectuals of our time view traditional gender roles as a negative, to the point where we will see men trying to act like women and vice versa. And you see them going through a medical transition or hormone treatment in misguided attempts to resemble distorted similarities of the opposite sex. Homosexuality, hedonism, promiscuity, and single motherhood, sexual transmitted diseases have all become commonplace in our society. But as sexual degenerates take over society, people will inevitably see the truth about the LGBT community, and where is the evidence? We have the laws where if anybody spreads AIDS, and keep in mind that AIDS is explicitly a homosexual disease, given the fact that they engage in sodomy, or as many of you will know, anal sex. Anal sex inevitably leads to HIV, and then HIV inevitably leads to AIDS. But however, well, now that you guys know that sodomy is correlated to, it's like literally a massive high for disease, we have a law in California where it's only a misdemeanor if somebody deliberately spreads AIDS and infects whoever they are having sexual contact with. You will go to jail longer if you call someone by their biological pronoun, even though, even though spreading a life-threatening disease intentionally to another person is almost practically homicide. You could go to jail for only 3 to 6 months for spreading AIDS, but you could go an entire year or more for calling a male because he felt offended, or calling a female because she felt offended. How did Western civilization die? How did it go from having these strong traditional family bonds to the standard fuck party that we see today? Sexual depravity has always existed to some degree, even among the empires and emperors, so our societies have dealt with it at some point or another. But that doesn't mean it was tolerated or accepted. In many cases, it was tolerated, but it wasn't accepted at all. But most of those people were executed or arrested for their depravity. But today, most Marxist professors and academia would have praised these men for their dysfunctions, and our society wouldn't bat an eye. How do we go from punishing degeneracy to celebrating it and glorifying it? Part of it is due to the nature of many people who identify with alternative lifestyles. Many of these alt lifestyle people don't want us to accept their behavior. They are obsessed with getting our approval, and so they want acceptance. There's a difference between tolerance and acceptance. See, tolerance is when you have a group of people who identify with all these different kinds of alternative lifestyles. Doesn't matter which one. That's not the question. It doesn't matter which one. But you have all these different people who identify with these alternative lifestyles, but you're not throwing them in jail or killing them immediately for that. The fact that they're allowed to exist is tolerance. Acceptance is a whole nother thing. See, it's because many of them haven't been able to convince themselves that what they are doing is right, so they need to try and get our approval. But however, let's examine the corruption and see which philosophers push these kinds of depravity on us. Let's start with Sigmund Freud, or aka Sick-Minded Freud. He came up with this theory called the Oedipus complex, where supposedly young men secretly desired to kill their fathers and have sex with their mothers. Freud also believed that Western civilization was sexually repressed, and I forgot which book it was, but Freud explained that we must remove all barriers to instinctual gratification, which will lead to nothing but a sexual free-for-all. There has never been a successful civilization that has ever thrown a loose notion of love is love or free love in such a fashion, as stable monogamous relationships are what's necessary for the raising of children and securing the existence of our civilization. But this hasn't stopped people like Sigmund Freud, aka Sick-Minded Freud, and all of the intellectual frauds from claiming that sexual restraint is something negative. But however, all of his theories have been rejected by many psychologists. His idea of the Oedipus complex and the psychosexual development are all unscientific. There's no evidence to find it, and it's all unfalsifiable. His theories are just as false as those left-wing postmodernists who claim that math is sexist and racist to oppress people of color and women. The best way to destroy a nation or any type of civilization is by ultimately over-sexualizing it. Many people from the Frankfurt School claim that if you wanted to stop a child from being a so-called problematic, anti-Semitic, racist, or nationalist, is by sexualizing them so they can grow up to be progressive. I have talked about how behavior and actions, even your personality, sometimes shape our political views. Make a child or a teen interested in sex and just chances are he's going to grow up to become a feminist. He's going to identify with Marxism, and he believes in nothing but mindless sex, no marriage, and no family. A kid who's not interested in starting a family but masturbates to porn or has nothing but sex, most of them will likely turn to the progressive agenda. I once talked about why Hollywood and the entertainment industry is so progressive, left-leaning, and liberal, and hence this coincides with sexual deviants that have taken over our entertainment industry, and we have all seen it. But in many places within the entertainment industry in Hollywood, etc., these are nothing but cutthroat industries. So much competition to get in and find stardom that people will almost do anything. So they will do a thing called casting couches, where actors give sexual favors in exchange for getting roles. It's sometimes men and women, men and men, and women, a free-for-all. Imagine that you have an entire cast of actors who got in by engaging in morally deficient behavior. Do you expect their political opinions to be of higher value? These things go hand in hand. What separates us ultimately from the left is our morality. After World War I, Europe became demoralized, and after many monarchs were destroyed, Europe was open for ideological detriment and Marxist subversion to spread, and the idea that was opposed to sexual restraint was popular among many of the Central Power states. And under the communist dictatorship in Hungary, a man by the name of George Lukács, the deputy commissar of culture, decided to push many of these ideas on Hungarian youth and on school children. He called it himself, cultural terrorism, to de-Christianize Hungary and destroy the patriarchal family. It involved instructing school children about free love, promiscuity, and reject Christian moral ethics like monogamy and the patriarchal family structure. And when the Hungarians didn't take too kindly to this sexual dysfunction or just this dysfunction in general, when the Romanians invaded in 1919, they wanted the communist government to be overthrown. But however, there was multiple and historical evidence of sexual degeneracy in Weimar Germany, like the Institute of Sexuality or Sexology, and of course I mentioned the Frankfurt School, which their goal was to weaken Western norms regarding sex, such as the nuclear family, traditional family rules, and monogamy. And after Hitler became Chancellor of Germany around 1933, many of these Marxists from the Frankfurt School brought their opinions on sexuality and their anti-Western sentiments, and their ideas oftentimes were pushed in college campuses and universities, just within academia. Oh, and also, there was also evidence to suggest that many of the Bolsheviks in Russia were also trying to start their own sexual revolution and to spread basically sexual degeneracy amongst the Soviet Union, although I haven't really looked into all the stuff that they did, so I'll leave some links below the description. So we can establish that besides all of these sick philosophers that are embraced, they aren't the only ones to blame for the breakdown of morality. It also comes from the sexual revolution in the 1980s, which became the spark of change in sexual attitudes within the West, influenced by intellectual forefathers such as Herbert Marcuse, Theodor Adorno, and all these Frankfurt School theorists, J.D. Unwin, and a very depraved man by the name of Alfred Kinsey, Betty Friedan, and Germaine Greer. But Alfred Kinsey was the greatest of them all. Kinsey dismissed any research and distorted the evidence if it stood in his way. Alfred Kinsey himself, as a teenager, inserted random objects into his urethra like straws, metal wires, ouch by the way, and pipe cleaners. Then later in his life, Kinsey will tie up his scrotum with a metal cord and inserted a toothbrush into his urethra. And due to the fact that he became so numb to the pain in his genitals, he was able to circumcise himself with no anesthetic. He was also known to fuck and sleep around with his researchers and lab assistants and organize standard fuck parties at his home and served permission pies to his fellow sexual degenerates at his orgies. But Kinsey, unfortunately, was successful at destroying the West's moral values. It's embarrassing when you think about it, to hear the fact that Western civilization allowed itself to be brainwashed by a perverted entomologist sodomite who shoved a toothbrush in his cock. So by the 1960s, the ground was laid for the subversion of morality. Thanks to these Marxists and other sexologists, sex will now be discussed more openly, and now we have sexual deviant fetish practices which are now being accepted and told to be normal, while the people who look down upon that are told to be backwards, misogynistic, racist, sexist, or simply boring prudes. So the sexual revolution was the catalyst for the destruction of this morality, such as the destruction of the traditional gender roles, and the destruction of the male and female binary, and the destruction of masculinity and femininity. And now, onto the sexologist by the name of John Money, who claimed that gender was simply a social construct. His research is cited by many doctors, therapists, and psychologists today as so-called proof of the benefits of gender reassignment operations, but they were all flawed and unbacked, and it actually led to one man to commit suicide. Hell, many progressives will argue that transgender suicide is the manifestation of discrimination, but in countries like Canada, Germany, Iceland, etc., transgenderism is very accepted and popular. The social acceptance is very high. If you bully them, you'll go straight to jail, and most of their gender reassignment surgeries are subsidized via taxpayer funds, and there is no difference. They continue to commit suicide on mass amounts. And also, there is a breakdown of the traditional family. For some reason, marriage is treated like a nothing. No-fault divorces, the majority of that are initiated by women by at least 69% and only 31% of men. It has been correlated with the average marriage and a huge explosion of single motherhood and the destruction of the legitimacy of marriage itself and the family bond. This matrimonial bond, which has been essential of raising of healthy children and the preservation of communities, and due to the family court system along With no-fault divorce combined with affirmative consent, it has destroyed the incentive of young men to want to pursue marriage. But now, they can masturbate to porn and just go MGTOW or choose the alternative lifestyles. And now, here comes the question that many people will ask. Many people will ask, who cares? What's wrong with sexual liberation as long as you aren't hurting anyone and you consent, right? Well, securing the future of a strong, healthy, and proper civilization is, of course, obviously more important than my dick, my cum. Any civilization that allows sexual conduct to flourish has no future. We see how many Western nations have low birth rates for that reason. It is an imperative for all people to reject a false narrative of philosophies that come from mentally ill, perverted subversives and realign ourselves with traditional moral values.
It didn't take long before I stumbled upon the idea of bug chasing. People had talked, one person had talked to me about it on the phone line before I started hooking up with positive tops. And I told him he had to be negative, and he said, well, he's positive. And I said, well, you know, and I was still like, well, I guess maybe we could hook up, but, you know, you can't in me. And he would say, oh, but I want to. And then he said, sorry, it's hard. He would say, well, so, well, he goes, no, I'll charge you up, and that's just a routine party. But I've been to barebacking parties, and they say specifically, don't ask status, and don't tell status. And that's just the rule. If you do it, you're asked to leave. And really, they know that there are gonna be bug chasers there. They know there are gonna be gift givers there.
Kimboy has rented the dungeon to have a party tonight. About 150 guys are coming, and they're from his list. He's invited guys, and then we have a list, and we've invited them. And they are coming here for our standard party that we generally hold here once a month. I mean, the rules basically have always been no drugs, no attitude, no condoms, no clothing. We do allow condoms now if guys want to use them. We have no problem, but 100 guys, 120 guys at the party, we'll find 2 or 3.
Allowing people like this to rule our societies will be like you letting a psychopathic serial killer to run your society. But anyway, we have seen that HIV and AIDS have increased due to standard fuck parties hosted by many in the gay community. HIV can only be spreaded through anal sex without a condom. Let's also not forget that there is a bug chasing community where gay men try to get AIDS on purpose, and asking gay people if they have AIDS or HIV is considered offensive to many of the homosexuals who are HIV positive. There's a policy called don't ask, don't tell all around the gay community. And this is why we see how the gay lobby, along with leftist mayors, pushing for making it almost a non-crime for knowingly infecting people with HIV. But this is what you can expect from California, a state that is the breeding ground of sexual deviancy and mental illness. And if we continue to accept these things, there will be no bright future. Which is why it is important to align ourselves with the traditional moral values.